Hey, poets and poetry fans out there. This is James P. Wagner here with Local Gems Press again. We're continuing the course that we've been doing on the different types of poetic meter. This has been a very well received course so far, and people keep wanting more. At this point, we're up to Iambic Meter. If you've ever taken any kind of a poetry class or a writing class or ever studied the work of Shakespeare in college or in high school or anything like that, you've probably heard of at least Iambic pentameter or Iambic meter in general. There's a lot of other ones out there that are less well known. This is definitely the most well known one in the English language, but there's some nuances to it that people don't really understand. So let's get into it. First of all, what is an iamb? It's a metrical foot in poetry consisting of one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, at least in English. We have to remember that poetic meter exists in a lot of different languages. In Latin and Greek, for example, this was expressed as a short syllable followed by a long one. This is actually the exact opposite of a trochee, which if you're following along this course so far, you've seen, which was stressed, unstressed. And iambic verse is considered the most natural way that we speak in the English language, which is why it keeps getting brought up so many times in a lot of works of literature. Here's a few examples of some iambic words, and you can see the unstressed, stressed in these. Exist, belong, predict, abide, cafe, and distress. So like I said, iambic pentameter is the most common type of iambic verse used in the English language. It's used in a lot of different sonnets and a lot of different soliloquies and dramatic plays examples. Iambic pentameter is just 5 feet of iambs. As if you've watched the Understanding Poetic Meter video, or you understand at this point, it's just, you know, the number of meters that are actually there, the number of poetic feet. So it's 10 syllables total because it's 2 syllables per foot, stress and unstressed times 5 for 10 syllables. Iambic pentameter is commonly used in poetry in verse forms. Elizabethan dramatists, for example, such as John Donne and, of course, William Shakespeare, the great Shakespeare, used this form in their poems. All of his sonnets it was used in, and a lot of times in his plays to keep the formal speech there and to keep the drama elevated. And like we said earlier, is considered to be the natural rhythm of conversation in English, which is why it's used so often. Iambic pentameter in Shakespeare. These are a couple lines that you're probably familiar with. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. These, of course, being the opening lines to the play Romeo and Juliet, whether or not that's your favorite out there. Everybody's heard of that. A lot of people at first glance don't realize that the lines actually are in iambic pentameter. More commonly known, of course, like we said, is the iambic pentameter in Shakespeare sonnets. So here's sonnet 141. In faith, I do not love thee with mine eyes, for they in thee 1,000 errors note. But 'tis my heart that loves what they despise, who in despite of you is pleased to dote. Nor are mine ears with thy tongue's tune delighted, nor tender feeling to base touches prone, nor taste nor smell desire to be invited to any sensual feast with thee alone. But my 5 wits nor my 5 senses can dissuade one foolish heart from serving thee, who leaves unswayed the likeness of a man, thy proud heart's slave and vassal wretch to be. Only my plague thus far I count my gain, that she that makes me sin awards me pain. But of course, a lot of talk of iambic pentameter out there. It's kind of been drilled into us in all sorts of English and literature classes. We need to remember there are other types of iambic meter. There's a lot of different syllable counts, or rather feet counts, that add up to the syllables. For example, here we have a couple of familiar lines from Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. And if you look closely at this, this is an example of a poem that actually uses both iambic tetrameter, or 4 feet of iambs, and iambic trimeter, or 3 feet of iambs. In the first line there, you can see, because I could not stop for death, which is 8 syllables. And then the next one after that, he kindly stopped for me, which is 6 syllables. So this is a good example of a lot of people sometimes when they're looking at poetic meter, they actually look at a poem to see if they're following that meter strictly. The truth of the matter is actually there is a lot of classic poems and a lot of very well-known poets who have a lot of different types of meter actually within the same poem, or at least some similar meters. This being one example of the 8 and the 6 syllables. There's other times where, you know, like we talked in the one about Edgar Allan Poe with the trochees. we talked about how it was octameter, but in the ending line of that was actually 4 syllables or cut in half. Sometimes they do that for dramatic effect. So sometimes people looking at a lot of different poems and they're like, well, hey, this looks like it's, you know, not entirely in iambic pentameter, and that's okay. A lot of poets, they take license for whatever is needed at the moment. Sometimes the regular flow of iambic pentameter, like we said, is supposed to be the natural way that people talk in English. Well, sometimes they'll do something in there that jars it right out of the pattern because they're trying to bring emphasis to a word or a particular phrase. You see Shakespeare do that a lot in his soliloquies, and you see that in a lot of other poets too. So hopefully this explains iambic meter for those out there who weren't too familiar with it. And if you're familiar with iambic pentameter or iambic meter, this was just a good brush up. Hopefully you're enjoying this course. We still got a couple more videos to go. So we'll see you next time. Take care.